everybody. Welcome to the Hallmarkies podcast. And we are finishing off Jane Austen month by talking about one of her most popular novels, her first novel that she ever got published, is Sense and Sensibility. It's the first one that I ever read from her. And we are ranking some of the adaptations of Sense and Sensibility. It's going to be fun, including the new version that just aired on Hallmark Channel. And we're going to have a recap of that from the Hogany cast. It's going to be super fun. So I'm looking forward to it. And I am film critic Rachel Wagner, and Terry's here.
Hi.
And where does Sense and Sensibility rank for you among the Jane Austen stories?
It is my favorite.
Is it? Okay.
It is, yeah, it's my favorite. I would put like Sense and Sensibility, Persuasion, and then Pride and Prejudice, because I know a lot of people love Pride and Prejudice, but it was the first Jane Austen I had read as well.
Yeah.
So it has also the very first Jane Austen movie I'd ever seen. Like any interpretation of it. So it's a lot of firsts for me.
Yeah, same. It was the first one that I had seen as well. And my Pride and Prejudice is my favorite, but I love all of her books, and especially the big four. I love so much. And I used to read all six every year. That was a tradition of mine. And Sense Sensibility definitely rang true for me because I have three sisters, and in particular was very close with my sister, just 2 years younger. So the relationship between Marian and Eleanor, not that our relationship didn't mirror that. If anything, I was probably the more high strung, and she was the more mature one. But still, you can relate to the dynamic of the two sisters and very much. And so it was the first one I read, and then I quickly read Pride and Prejudice and Persuasion.
Same with me. Like, I went straight next into Pride and Prejudice.
Yeah, and then Emma took a little bit longer because it's her longest book.
Yeah,
so, but I do love it. I love all of her. I mean, I especially love those big four. Yeah, they're so good. So yeah, what do you think it is about Jane Austen that is so timeless? Why is it that, and we talked a little bit about when we were ranking the modern adaptations, but what do you think about her stories that make them so appealing to any age?
I think at the core, they're just realistic problems in many times, like that we're still dealing with today, whether it's financial or whether it's about falling in love, or this person has some type of scandal, like the wrong marriage, the wrong relationship, or loss of money, or just struggling to find oneself and accepting oneself. And even like in Pride and Prejudice, even the prejudices that they have and the prideful, it's things that we still deal with that are forever. Like
and that family like that. Dynamic in both of those books, in Pride and Prejudice and in Sense Sensibility.
Very complicated
about sisters.
As life.
And her choices. And so, well, let's dive in. So this is kind of unique. You have 10 that you're ranking. I have 7 that I'm ranking, just because I didn't have time to see the miniseries from the 70s and 80s, and I didn't have time to watch the Bollywood version, but I still wanted to include them, and you had seen them, and I think it's perfectly fine for us to have different numbers that we're doing. So that's what's going on for this. And if you've seen any of these, we'd love to hear your rankings and your thoughts. But what do you have as last place?
The Marianne.
Yes.
So I kind of made you watch this one.
Yes.
So it's all my fault. No, it really focuses. It's a modern day interpretation. It focuses mainly on, of course, Marianne's quasi love triangle with Wickham and Colonel Brandon. it's set in modern day. It's very low budget. It does have that, like you said, mentioned to me, it does have a student feel to it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's interesting choices because I just think Marianne is such a dope, and
Yeah.
Willoughby is is a drug dealer, and
Yeah. I
Colonel
mean,
Brandon is like a police officer.
it's always hard to judge micro budget films
Right,
because there's like we did a whole ranking of indie rom-coms. That's like a completely different discussion for the most part than like what we think of as indie usually has like a
right,
budget of 2-3 million,
yeah,
has like an actual, like accredited cast that are paid full wages, like stuff like that. Whereas like the micro budget films oftentimes are student films
yeah.
and usually are like literally done at home, and they can be really cool, and a lot of times they're done for like under $100,000.
I will say
And
that,
a lot of like great directors got their start in micro budget, like
yeah,
even Christopher Nolan, like his
yeah.
first film, Martin Scorsese. They both of them have their micro budget films. There's if people want to see Christopher Nolan, they called The Following,
I
and
will say that this
that's
movie doesn't look bad. I thought it's like well put together, and
for what it is,
for what it is, totally. I
Yeah.
thought it's very well put together for like the limited sets. There's a lot of like
Mm-hmm.
on the street, walking in the park. I totally get that. And I was like, it
Yeah.
doesn't look bad. It's got some wonky acting, but
Like if
it's
I was a student and I had made this
oh,
with all
I'd be
my
super
friends and stuff,
proud.
I'd
It
be
looks
like,
good.
yeah, I'd be stoked.
Yeah,
So it's
totally.
it's
I
it's
would,
it's hard to judge these micro budget films. But yeah, some of the choices they made, I think that Sense Sensibility is tough to modernize because so much of it is based on class, and the class
exactly.
is just not the same issue.
It
I'm
is
not saying it
not.
doesn't exist, but not in the same way that it does. Like making Willoughby's choice, it does not like makes that
I
not only is
thought
he a drug dealer in this, but he's also like forced blackmailed to marry,
exactly. Did you
and
find it a little, there
which
was
makes no
certain, yeah.
sense in
I found
modern.
some of it, at first I thought it was going to play with the interracial sort of
Mm-hmm.
relationship for both Brandon and Willoughby, which is fine. But I thought at times it was a tad, a little racially insensitive for certain
Yeah.
moments.
Yeah.
It's not done with an ill intent. But yes,
Mm-hmm.
he does have to marry the rich white girl who's in love with him
Which makes
to
no
keep
sense.
getting
Like,
out of
why
trouble.
would you want your niece to marry somebody that she doesn't love in this
Not
day
only
and
that, but
age?
like exactly, not only that, but like he
Someone
also
who's
he
forced to
knocks
marry
up,
you.
yeah, and then Colonel Brand, they make her sister, but he knocks up and gets a white woman addicted to drugs. And I was like, okay, guys.
Yeah.
And then the whole thing, so like be prepared. I did think there was some things that were a little bit I don't know if it was I don't
Yeah.
know who made this movie. I don't know who made it, but I was like, I don't think there's ill intent in it. I just don't think it's well thought out.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I don't know who made it. Like I said, behind it, so I'm not sure. But there were a couple of things I was like, huh,
So,
So
yeah. Ho, ho, ho. We'd like to take a second and thank our sponsor for this episode of the podcast. It's the Hallmarkies Patreon.
Do you love Hallmarkies podcast, especially at Christmas?
Do you enjoy the holiday previews, recaps, interviews, and bonus episodes?
If the answer is yes, please consider supporting the Hallmarkies Patreon. We need your help to do what we do both during the Christmas season and all year round.
But not only do you help a podcast led by strong, independent women by becoming a Patreon, you get to become a part of the Hallmarkies family.
Starting at only $2 a month as a patron, you will have access to our Facebook Patreon group where we talk about the movies, shows, and more all year.
We also have many monthly patron watch-alongs with guests like Lacey Chabert, Natalie Hall, Paul Campbell, Mary Lou Henner, and more, giving their behind-the-scenes details of their films.
As a patron, you also have the chance to provide input into the podcast and even join us at different tiers.
So this Christmas season, spread some cheer to the Hallmarkies Patreon and become a member today. You won't regret it.
Go to patreon.com/hallmarkies to learn more.
That's patreon.com/hallmarkies. So what do you have next?
For number 9, I have Sense and Sensibility, and we talked about this one before in the modern adaptation. This is the one with Ashley
Oh.
Williams and Marla Sokoloff, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, Marianne is so terrible in this movie. Eleanor cleans toilets. Their dad goes to jail for insider trading. They make perfume, and they absolutely have boring love. The love interests are boring, and it's not a very good
They're hunky
adaptation.
though.
They're
Maybe
hunky, but they're
boring, but
boring. Like, I need more than looks, Rachel. Sometimes.
yeah.
But I don't know. It didn't work. Ashley Williams is always very charming in anything she does. She gives it her all with these type
Yeah,
of
it didn't hold
quirky.
up that well for me
No, it
rewatching
didn't. I
it.
think too.
I
I
thought it
think it
was
is
stronger.
because this is from 2011, and I think it
Yeah.
is a product of its time. Forsaking that it didn't like exactly age too well or hold up, and sometimes that happens. But I had no attachment to it either different. So
Yeah, I actually have Sense and Sensibility and Snowman next, just because it just annoys me so much because it's
yes, that
like
that
no
is yeah.
effort at all to be Sense
Ah,
and Sensibility,
yeah,
aside from the fact that it's two sisters and they don't even give like the right name to the right sister. They
exactly.
have Aaron Krakau's character who's the more high-strung, high-spirited one called Ella for Eleanor, and then they have Kimberly Susted's character called Marianne, which just doesn't make any sense. And
Totally.
yeah, I was just
It's just
irritated.
like this is like who thought this was a good? They just like you could have made it a regular story without the attachment to it.
Like
This is
if they gave it a
yeah,
different name and it was just
totally. It
like
was like totally not
Christmas in
associated to it.
if it was
Yeah,
just like Christmas at the toy store or
right. Because
whatever,
he's a toy maker.
then it would
Yeah,
be, I guess, fine, like a perfectly vanilla Hallmark
of
movie.
course, because
But
they're party planners as well. So
Since I'm specifically ranking Sense and Sensibility here,
yeah.
I felt like this is worse than Sense and Sensibility because
Well,
Sense and
yeah.
Sensibility at least tries. There's like
You are
some
correct
effort.
on you are correct on that, and I put it as my number 8, the Sense, Sensibility, and Snowman, for the simple reason
Mm-hmm.
that I like Luke McFarlane, so he got a 1 up on it. And that's it.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
the only reason it goes higher. Because I like Luke McFarlane. And generally I think he's putting in a pretty good work and but
yeah.
it's nothing, yeah.
So what do you
It's
have
just a name
next?
grab. So for my 7 would be From Prada to Nada.
Okay, yeah.
Which I think is a pretty good modern day adaptation, and we spoke about this also in our
Uh-huh.
previous modern Jane
Yeah.
Austen adaptations. And Alexa Pennebaker steals the movie for me. In this movie, I think she's so funny and she's so great. Like, oh my gosh,
Mm-hmm.
we're poor when they're driving through. Like, is this how poor people live when?
And the
Like
guys are very hunky in this.
very hunky and and
April Bowby is funny as the villain.
totally. I think
She's good.
Eleanor's storyline suffered more.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah,
true,
it's
they updated the half brother storyline, which I thought was a
uh-huh.
nice change of pace, for updating the story. But yeah, his wife was such a mean girl, and she was great too in that. So,
Yeah.
and I said this before, but Alexa Pennevega's hair is just on point.
Yeah. Yeah. I have it
Completely.
a little higher,
Yeah.
what do you have next?
So for my number 6, I have the 1981 BBC 7-part miniseries.
Mm-hmm.
Uh it's the book. Um, I think the acting is quite well. There's nothing really memorable about this iteration. It's very much the book. It does look a little bit dated because there are some early like 80s productions that the BBC put out that still look like it could have been made in the
Well, a lot
60s,
of these BBC ones from the 80s look like plays.
They did, and they were also live. Many of them
Mm-hmm.
were shot live as well. So that's why they look that way. They have that sort of aesthetic. But I do think it's charming, if you want
Mm-hmm.
something really that delves really into the book, there's enough parts here. And I believe they're half hour. I think they're 30-minute installments. But so it really delves into the stuff, and there's the great part where like, oh, the china, and the mom's like, the china was my wedding gift, and I was like, yes, like there's like a lot of little things like it has the time. I think I appreciate this because it has the time to really delve into the story and certain things that might get sometimes passed up, when you have a shorter time period. But
yeah. So then what do you have after that?
So my number 5 is the Hallmark version, 2024
Okay.
Hallmark version.
So I have Sense Sensibility, and then I have so at 4 is where I have this new version from out of 7. Yeah. So yeah, I have Marianne, Sense and Sensibility, and Snowman, Sense and Sensibility, and then now this new one. So overall, I guess, yeah, what did you think of it?
Well, I thought it was fine. It's perfectly it's a perfectly fine adaptation of Sense and Sensibility. I have, I will say it's filmed in England. The sets were good. I thought the costuming and the hair was pretty good. I mean, there's a lot of detail that you could tell they spent money on this. My complaint about it is that I think it just flies by.
Yeah.
It goes through the story so quickly. They don't take a minute to take a breath. And because I watched this without the commercials, I think it was even more noticeable that they didn't take a moment to just let this part sink in, like let this moment sit with the viewer. I just thought that was like rush, rush, rush.
Yeah.
I hated the score. I hated the score, but
I just really wish that they had given this a full 2 hours.
Exactly. I wish it had more time. That's the one thing. I wish it had more time.
Yeah.
So like
it did
really
feel rushed. I agree.
Yeah, that's my main complaint about this is that I hope Hallmark delves more into adapting, like doing period and going back to doing all this like they used to, but it's completely inspired by Bridgerton, but it's a far more because of the casting and stuff, more inclusive.
Right.
But it feels much more of a traditional costume drama or period piece than Bridgerton does.
Right.
But I did catch that during the ball scene, they were playing Seal's Kiss from a Rose, an instrumental version. I was like, I know this. And I was like, it's Kiss from a Rose. So also inspired by Bridgerton, which also does modern music and instrumental. So you could tell there's that. But it's actually pretty traditionally told. But I just wish it was longer so we can get more time with the characters and more time getting invested in these couples. But
I really appreciate all the effort, and I think I enjoyed it. I think it's good. I do agree that it feels rushed, and I wish they'd made it a 2-parter. I think it would have really helped.
It would have been wonderful if it was a 2-parter.
Yeah, I think it would have gotten the ratings. Like I don't know. I feel like that would have been smart, but it's certainly a billion times better than what they've been doing for Mahogany lately. I mean, those movies have been really bad, in my opinion. So I'm glad for that. And my only real nitpick is I actually think the costumes just felt a little off to me. I love Regency and I love historical movies.
Yeah.
But there was something that felt heavy. It felt like the costumes were all a little too big, and
I think it's the patterns on the costumes. And I was really thinking about this. Yeah,
I was saying the other day that they felt a little Bo Peepy to me, like that they look.
They're very colorful. The prints on the fabric make it look bulky, I think, but it's weird.
And you just kind of lost their figure. You lost their and
it's kind of weird because
it just didn't quite work. And but I appreciate the effort. Totally. I don't know.
It is weird because some of those costumes are in Sanditon.
Yeah.
They reused some of those costumes, and maybe it's just the way that it was photographed as well.
Yeah. It just looked. I just reminded me of the old Greer Garson Pride and Prejudice.
Oh,
those. I mean, it wasn't that crazy. Those costumes.
They had balloon dresses in that one. Yeah.
Yeah, just in the sense that I'm paying too much attention to the costumes.
Well, they had a completely different era costumes in that movie too. Completely.
But
yeah, I get it. Yeah.
If this were the direction that Hallmark was going, both in period and in a modern ones, I would be very happy.
I would be happy as well too, because even it's not fair to compare, but only the comparison's sake, when they did the Gilded Age, the Gilded Newport mysteries, which is also completely period but set in Victorian. I thought that was also well made and well looking, given the budget and the time constraints that they had to work with. I think you have a little bit more leeway because they filmed this overseas, like this, and it's mostly a British cast too. But I do feel like they put in the effort to make these look as good as possible. And that's why it goes, you're right. Having it in miniseries would be great. I'm really curious to see what the ratings are going to be for this, because I do want Hallmark to continue experimenting with this. This used to be their bread and butter. They used to do costume dramas and Westerns all the time.
It's true.
And they've abandoned that. And I would like to see them go back to it. You know.
We'd like to take a second and thank our sponsor for this episode of the podcast. It's Baker Bookhouse and their spring releases. First, The Seamstress of Acadia by Laura France. Caught between the warring French and English on Canada's rugged shores in 1755, Sylvie Gallant is forced from her Acadian home and family and is alone in colonial Virginia. Now the enemy soldier who once tore her world apart might be the key to restoring her shattered past. Next, The Irish Matchmaker by Jennifer Dybel. Catriona Daly is no stranger to the business of love, even though personally she has yet to find it. Eager for a match of her own and a fresh start away from her sleepy village, she makes grand plans for the annual Lisdoonvarna Matchmaking Festival. She never expects, however, a shy, widowed sheep farmer to distract her from her goal. To get ready for summer, we have Just for the Summer by Melody Carlson. Ginny Masters manages a Seattle boutique hotel but is tired of the rat race. Jacqueline Bowman manages her grandfather's fishing lodge in Western Washington, but she longs for city life. Eager for a change, these women swap jobs for the summer, but it's not quite so simple to find the happiness and love they're searching for. And finally, Sandkissel Inn by Irene Hannon. When a man struggling to recoup from a tragic loss and woman still reeling from an unplanned career detour join forces to save a floundering B&B on the Oregon coast, they might also discover that hope and healing can sometimes be found in the most unexpected places. You can pick up any of these books wherever books are sold now or later this spring and save up to 40% off on these or the whole spring book release list at bakerbookhouse.com/featured/rebel-fiction or use the affiliate link below. That's bakerbookhouse.com/featured/rebel-fiction.
I'm going to get my translator out because I will butcher this this title. And I do not want to be culturally insensitive, but this is the 2000 Indian adaptation of Sense and Sensibility. Hold on. I don't know if you can catch it. It's right to the mic, but now I gotta press pause so I can stop. It's a Kundukum Khan. That's what it sounds like. I'm butchering. I'm led to believe that the translation in English for the title is I have found it. I apologize for butchering that language, and if you didn't hear
I appreciate that effort.
If you didn't hear it, I'm really sorry about that.
Yeah, and this stars Ashura Rai, right? Correct?
Yes, it does. She's lovely. Her. She plays the names are different, but she plays the version of Marion. I don't know where to begin with this movie, but I did love it. Like, there's so much going on in this movie. It's done in the movie is done in the Tamale language. So I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. So it's not Bollywood, it's Tollywood. Like RRR is Tollywood and stuff like that.
Right, yeah.
And that's an important, I have learned that is an important distinguish between them, the films.
Yeah.
I don't know where to start with this movie. There's so much. There's an intermission in this movie. I don't know where to start. It starts off opening up in a war zone, where you have the basically the Colonel Brandon of it, where he loses his leg and he's just a sad sack, and he meets these girls who are living with their grandfather, who keeps trying to tell them he's sick about the will, and they don't get it because I think he's trying to change the will. but if and and of course the Wickham is played by the version of Wickham is played by like a financer, and she is a singer. This movie's all over the place, Rachel. It's hard to explain. Like you have to see it, but basically, like he marries somebody else. Like Wickham will eventually break her heart by marrying somebody else because he gets into financial trouble with his company.
You mean Willoughby?
Willoughby, I'm sorry, Wickham. Yes, pardon. I'm getting all my men confused. Pardon me, the Willoughby character. Yeah, because he gets into financial trouble and he needs bailout for his finance company, and that's how that story breaks, and that's how the Colonel Brennan's been there by her side helping her, and he gives her this flute to play, and so that's how that story mirrors that. And of course, the girls do get kicked out once their grandfather dies, because a brother who hasn't been, the brother hasn't been around for 10 years and his wife kicks them all out of the house. And so they got all, hunt for work. And then for the Eleanor portion, she's kind of got bad luck in relationships. All the men she wants to marry end up dying or whatever. But she meets this guy who's working in the film industry and will only commit once he's made a successful movie, which makes no sense to me. But she works in computers and she has to get confidence in herself. And then he's possibly like there's another female action star in a movie that the rumors are they're romantically linked together, and then they're not. And so those are the portions of the movie that kind of match Sense and Sensibility, but there's so much more to this movie, and I'm having a really hard time trying to explain it, but it is something you have got to see. It is delightful. The songs are great. The dance numbers are great. I mean, this is a lovely movie. And a hidden gem. I didn't know it existed. I'm so happy I found it. I mean, it's really worth a watch. It's a time investment, though.
I was sad that we didn't include it in the modern rankings. I didn't hear about it until after.
Same.
And so, yeah.
So, but it's like if you have the time to sit to it, I made the time. I was like, I'm watching this movie. I'm going for it. I'm so glad I did because I found it very delightful. And I really do love Bollywood and Tollywood and all these type of movies. I mean, if I could sit down and watch 2.5 hours of one episode of my Turkish historical dramas, I can watch this movie, right?
Yeah.
So, there you go. It's one. Don't be afraid of subtitles. Subtitles are your friends.
Yes. My number 3 is where I have From Prada to Nada. I like it. I think it's funny, and I like the guys, hunky guys, and the girls and the Mexican culture, and I just really enjoy it. So what do you have next?
So my number 3 would be the 2008 3-part miniseries that gave on the BBC with Charity Wakefield and Dan Stevens and Janet McTeer.
Underrated for sure.
This is a completely underrated one. This is also adapted by Andrew Davis, most famously, who did the 1995 version of Pride and Prejudice. And like I said, he's adapted all of Jane Austen's novels, for the exception, all of the main ones anyway, for the exception of Mansfield Park, which he's never done. So I'm hoping that he finally does a Mansfield Park that we can all that's universally loved. So there's still time, Andrew. There's still time. Get to it. But yeah, it has the flares that were if you watch a lot of stuff that Andrew Davis adapts or writes, he's always got flares. He sexies it up, with the men shirtless or with wet shirts, whatever. And he does the same thing here with Dan Stevens for to hunkify Edward. He makes him chop wood. Don't you just love that, Rachel?
Yeah.
He makes him chop wood to hunkify Edward because he's like, Edward doesn't really get hunkified much. And so, I mean, this is underrated. It's charming. It's very lavish. It looks luxurious. I will say with every adaptation, like traditional adaptation of Sense and Sensibility, even in the new Hallmark version, every time they move to the lesser cabin, you're like, what are you talking about? This is a beautiful home you're moving into. Like, even in the new, like, when I was watching the new Sense and Sensibility, they were like, oh, it's not what we used to. I was like, this home is fantastic. What are you talking about? I think there's a
But
great story, too, of the Emma Thompson version when they moved in, where he was Prince Charles at the time. And they were like, oh, look at this house. And Prince Charles looked around and goes, well, that cottage is lovely. I don't know what they're speaking about.
We'd like to take a second and thank our sponsor for this episode of the podcast. It's the Hallmarkies merch store.
Are you looking for that perfect gift for the postable, hardy, or Hallmarky in your life?
What about getting that t-shirt or hoodie that will help you stand out at your next holiday party?
Now is the time to check out the Hallmarkies merch store.
Full of festive designs by artists like Jessica Miller, Carrie from Hallmark Comics, and more.
You can even have more than just shirts, but totes, cell phone cases, notebooks, mugs, and more.
And it isn't just Hallmark. We have designs for Anna Green Gables, Man from Snowy River, The Nanny, and more.
Every purchase at the merch store goes to help support the podcast and allows us to make the great content you know and love.
There are frequent sales, so go to tpublic.com/stores/hallmarkies or see the link in the description.
That's tpublic.com/stores/hallmarkies.
Did they do that?
I mean, going from the huge manor to, but also like all the other things that they
totally
would
yeah
have
it's
to,
a
like,
big
only
it's a
have,
big
like,
leap, but when you're
so, like, they would only have like 2 servants, and there's a scene in the in where they're talking about, well, we can't have meat anymore,
right,
things
we
like
can't
that.
afford meat anymore.
Yeah.
I get all that, but like it's kind of hard to, like, that's still a
No,
nice
I
house.
agree.
You are right, you're better off than I am at this point.
Yeah,
So
it wouldn't be too bad living in Barton Cottage.
that's just a funny little aspect,
I
a funny
agree.
aside to that
Yeah.
story. But I do love this. I don't even know if I think people are aware of it, but I don't know. It's probably the lesser known, I think, because there's one Sense and Sensibility that outshines them all, kind of like in Pride and Prejudice.
Well, so what do you have at 2?
So my 2 is the 1971 BBC 4-part miniseries.
Yeah.
I love this iteration.
Oh,
I think this
man,
might be my
see
favorite
it.
of my favorite of the miniseries. And it does look a little bit dated. It's from the 70s, but it has wonderful acting. Joanna David is in it. Like, there's like big future stars, British stars in it. But I think one of the main reasons I love this iteration so much is because Patricia Rutledge, who is most famous for playing High Sense in Keeping Up Appearances, but she plays Mrs. Jennings, and to me, she is the perfect iteration of Mrs. Jennings. I never do think that they get Mrs. Jennings quite right in any of these adaptations. And she portrays, she's very silly, very teasing, she's meddling. She's like good natured and she talks a lot, but it also portrays like her fierce loyalty. Like, I think what never gets portrayed is that she has a very good relationship with Eleanor that develops. They become close friends. And now she's very protective of not only Eleanor and Marianne, especially after all that happens with Willoughby. And, in the book, she stays with Eleanor through everything. When Marianne is sick, she's by her side. And it shows that in this adaptation. It shows where, like, I didn't want to let because they also portray Willoughby coming to visit Marianne, or try to anyway, when he speaks to Eleanor, which sometimes adaptations completely skip over that part. And I just love the way, I was like, this is how you portray Mrs. Jennings, because I don't think she's ever correctly portrayed fully in the adaptations. And it's one of the reasons why I put this one high above at least the miniseries.
Cool. Well, I actually, this might be shocking, but I have the Ang Lee Sense Sensibility at number 2, and I have the 2008 at number 1. They're both really strong. I love them both, but the only reason that I think that the 2008 is the best version of the story is, I think it is, the casting is the most accurate to the book.
Yes.
That Eleanor and Marianne actually, like, they look the correct ages, and
yes.
they are both excellent, and I like all of the guys in this are all wonderful, and I love the script. It's such a good adaptation.
Yeah.
And I just think that Dan Stevens is an upgrade over Hugh Grant. I'm sorry.
100%. I will say, I will agree with you on that. Yes.
Yes. And yeah, I just think it, aside from maybe the costumes aren't quite as, they're a little sloppy, but aside from that, I just think it does everything that the Ang Lee does, but just a little bit better. And
Has
so
more time too.
Yeah. So it gets it's my favorite.
Yeah.
But I, you know, I love the Ang Lee one. I mean, Kate Winslet is so
Fantastic.
good in it. And it was kind of our, I think, all of our introduction to her as an actress, and she's wonderful. And you even have like little roles in this that are so good.
Yeah.
Like Hugh Lowry's
Oh,
really
he is so
fun
funny
in
in
it.
this. Yeah.
Yeah, he's really good.
Alan Rickman is so, it's just fantastic. You know. Oh,
Like,
and Emma Thompson met her future husband, Greg Weiss, in this movie.
oh yeah.
So kudos to him.
The only thing though, and it's so hard because it's hard to make Colonel Brandon and Marianne feel like a believable match.
Mhm.
And I don't know if they totally pull it off in either of these. I don't
Mhm.
know. It's a tough one,
You know, it's
to not feel like she's settling. But you know, I love Alan Rickman. I don't know how you do that, but I didn't quite buy it as him as Colonel Brandon. But yeah, it's
Do
a great
you
movie, but I don't know, I do
yeah.
think the 2008 one is a little better. I really do.
I have the
Just
95
casting.
version. Yeah, I have the 95 version as my number one. I think Emma Thompson did a wonderful job adapting, with the time
The
limit. It
script.
looks so, yeah, it looks so gorgeous. I mean,
Yeah.
Kate Winslet is phenomenal.
Yeah.
It's so hard for me to, because I always end up comparing Marianne's to Kate Winslet interpretation, and that isn't fair, but I end up doing it
Yeah.
anyway.
I
I just
agree.
think she's so phenomenal in it.
And
And
I love when Edward comes back and Emma Thompson allows herself to truly ugly cry. It's one of the most
yes,
authentic cries I've ever seen in a movie.
which they
Like,
do too in the new Hallmark version.
and you hardly ever
Yeah.
see that in a movie,
No.
someone actually like ugly crying, where
Yeah.
kind of thing.
Like it's a release of all that stuff that she's had to endure.
Yeah,
She's had to
she
be
held it
strong
in.
for everyone. Like Marianne is very selfish.
Yes.
And she's had to be strong for her mother and for her sisters. And she's been carrying that's like a burden released from
Mm-hmm.
her shoulders.
So it's such a vulnerable, good moment. And
I wanted to ask you, based on the book, do you think they ended up with the right pairings for both Eleanor and Marianne?
No, I do
because I
struggle
don't.
with Brandon. I mean,
I honestly
it just
think
doesn't feel like a match that.
Do you think Eleanor was better suited with Brandon? Because when I was reading the book, there's a lot of, that's another thing that sometimes they don't really portray well in the adaptations, is the friendship that Eleanor and Brandon then have.
Yeah.
And I think in the 95 version, it's portrayed just a little bit better because Alan Rickman and Emma Thompson were especially good friends in real life. They had an incredible friendship. And I think that is portrayed slightly better, but they don't really go into depth because they have a lot of conversations, and he confesses like his past, and he's, and then he only gives Edward, that church on his property because of Eleanor. And
well, and that's the thing, is that it feels
I think
like
that they made a better couple.
Well, it's just like, it feels like Brandon is in love with Marianne because she reminds him of his past love, not because of like who uniquely she is.
Yes.
And then Marianne, it just feels like a shame to have her not with somebody high spirit, like maybe not Willoughby, but it does feel like she's settling a little bit. But
I think she does settle.
Modern,
she learns a hard lesson.
Yeah, our modern perspective into it.
I don't know. I've always felt in the book that Eleanor and Brandon would have been a much better match. And I've always been a
Yeah.
little bit disappointed that they didn't
Yeah,
end
I can
up that
see
way.
that. I
It's
can see
so
that.
funny because if I compare it to Little Women, you know how when we read the book, we all want Teddy and Joe to be together.
Right.
But not me. I was perfectly fine with Teddy and Joe ending up because I was like, that's a little bit more realistic. But
Mhm.
I hated that Teddy ended up with Amy.
Yeah.
And I was completely fine with who Joe ended up. And that was because
Well,
they
and she
made
was
her.
just trolling her fans because so many people wrote to her.
Oh, yes, they were like, you have to
Yeah.
make them. So she's like, fine, you want Joe to get married? Here she get married. I actually really
Yeah.
do love that pairing of Joe, but I just, the Amy and the
The
Teddy, I was
Amy
like, this
part.
doesn't sit well with me.
Yeah.
And I
They
kind of
did it
feel that,
about as well as you could do it in the most
right.
recent one.
Oh, well, I don't like that most recent one, but
Oh, really?
I
I
don't
love
like,
it, but
I
I
don't
think
like
that
Greta
they
Gerwig's Little Women. No.
Oh, interesting. I think that they did a good job with Florence Pugh's character take on Amy,
Oh,
and so yeah, that
like
works
a
for me. But
wooden
anyway, that's a
floor, that Amy. I am
what's
the
that?
only one who thinks that performance is bad.
Oh, wow.
I
Okay.
have controversial thoughts on that movie. I do, because I'm the lone wolf in that. But
Yeah,
to each
yeah.
their own. But I'm
Fair,
just
yeah, fair
comparing
enough.
it in like how I felt as a reader, like to the book version of Sense and Sensibility, where I was like, oh, I don't think. Well, such in life, we don't always make good pairings, but I felt like they were the stronger pairing. I would have rather them get
Yeah,
together. When I first read it, I was like, they have so many deep conversations. They are so similar and on the same page. I was like, are we going to have an upset here? And no, we didn't have an upset. But so I just think Edward is like, I also think that Eleanor settles for Edward, but because she doesn't have any opportunities.
yeah,
And it's not Edward's fault because he did truly fall in love with her and he was secretly engaged for all them years and he didn't know how to get out of his promise. Like he's not a bad character
mhm,
he just doesn't, there's nothing to him. And
yeah,
I think where Colonel Brandon has a little bit more to his character, but I agree that he loves an ideal version of Marianne. But
yeah, yeah. I
we
agree.
might be looking at it too much with a modern eye. It is true. We might be viewing it like that.
Yeah. Well, there we go. That is our ranking of the Sense Sensibility adaptations. Let us know what you think of these adaptations. We'd love to hear your thoughts, especially with some of the more obscure ones. Let us know what you think of the new version on Hallmark. And like I said, we'll have that Mahogany Cast episode about breaking down that movie. So that's going to be super fun. And Terry, where can people find you?
I am at Twitter posting shenanigans at Flurry Heaven. That's
Great.
Twitter.
And you can find me at Rachel's Reviews, all of our social media, iTunes, YouTube, and on Rotten Tomatoes. So check that out. Also, make sure you're following the podcast, the Hallmarkies Pod, Hallmarkies Podcast, all of our social media. And if you are listening on iTunes, please leave your ratings and reviews. Really appreciate that. And if you are listening on YouTube, please give the video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. We appreciate that so much. We also have our Patreon group and merch store. So check that out. We have some Jane Austen inspired merch at the merch store. So take a look. And thanks so much, everybody. We'll talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.